Okay, I guess I'm live now. Okay, great. So, oh Lord, I'm gonna get the light out the picture. So, I wanted to go live to do this rant on Superman because once again, we're talking about Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and a Variety article. Hold on, had to plug my power back in. The Variety article is talking about how Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is lifeless or vacuous or empty, or doesn't really have anything to do with the Superman mythos, or it doesn't have any life, or it said a bunch of different things. And people are reacting to that on Twitter and blah, 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 blah. And it's the usual thing where people are arguing about Superman. Okay. And so I wanted to make this live rant just to put some stuff out there and just to kind of tell you how I felt. I can't put all that in a tweet, okay? The thing I want to talk about is the Kents. The Kents, okay? The Kents. So first, let's get some background on the Kents. First of all, the Kents aren't mentioned in Superman's first appearance in Action Comics in 1938. The Kents are not mentioned. Who found Superman, according to that, was a passing motorist, if you didn't know that. The Kents are not introduced until Superman #1, okay, in 1939. And then also their names are not given. They're also, his mom's name is mentioned as Mary Kent, not Martha Kent at first, okay? Then what happens during the 40s is that their names vary. For example, in a 1942 Superman novel, The Adventures of Superman, their names are given as Eben and Sarah Kent. I bet you didn't know that. Then in the 1948 Superman film serial, their names are given as Eben and Martha Kent. Then Eben and Sarah Kent come back in the 1952 premiere Adventures of Superman television series. Okay? So where do Jonathan and Martha come in? They don't come in until later. So 10 years after Superman was introduced in 1948, Superman #53, they're named John and Mary Kent. But that's the one that firmly establishes that the Kents are the one that adopted Kal-El. They're not mentioned in the first appearance of Superman. It's a passing motorist. Go back and read it if you have access to that issue, okay? They go to an orphanage. They go to a home to try to help adopt him and name him Clark. And the people at the orphanage see his powers appearing. So they want to hurry up and get this little infant alien boy into the hands of these people, okay? Jonathan dies as Superman grows up, and on his deathbed, he tells him to become a force for good. Okay, and then he mentions the name Superman. You're a Superman. Become a Superman. That's where the name comes from. Okay. They also don't mention Superboy, even though, and I'm gonna get to that in a minute, even though Superboy had already been established. Okay. So the first naming of Pa Kent, Jonathan Kent, is Adventure Comics number 149 in 1950, volume 1. Ma Kent is first name Martha in Superboy, volume 1, number 12, January, February 1951, okay? And after that, she's called Martha. A writer wrote in and asked him what is her full name, and her full name was given as a response to that written query as Martha Hudson Clark Kent, okay? Then that whole origin was retconned to say that the original, Eben and Sarah, Eben and Mary, Eben and Martha, that them folks were Superman's parents on Earth 2. And Jonathan and Martha, as we knew it, were part of Earth 1. Now, here's what I've been trying to get to. The idea that his morals and his values come from the Kents was introduced later with the Superboy series. So it wasn't actually there from the beginning. Okay, that idea that Clark is who he is because of the Kents comes later with the Superboy series. Now that comes around 1949, and it's Superman having adventures, costumed or booted and suited, as we say, as a teenager. And it's because of that time that he spent with them, they're actually shaping and molding him into a better hero during that time. That's where that idea gets introduced. So it's about 10 years after Superman has been around, okay, that his adoptive parents get portrayed as the ones that taught him how to be a hero, okay? And that's also during that time where we get the mythos about how Martha made his costume, because Jonathan was the one that named him Superman. Jonathan was also the one that taught him how to have the dual Clark Kent Superboy persona, how to make Clark Kent and Superboy so very, very different so people wouldn't guess they were the same person. And that's also where we get the introduction of Martha making Superman's costume out of the blankets that were part of the clothing he came to Earth in the baby ship, in the rocket ship of baby Kal-El. Okay? So why am I bringing all that up? Because then it goes on to talk about how they are, there's a reason that they're first depicted as elderly and then they become middle-aged, blah, blah, blah. So why am I bringing all that up? I'll tell you why I'm bringing all that up. I'm bringing all that up because of this reason right here. Man, I need to get this light better because I'm still looking too dark in this shot and I don't like it. And I have another lamp in another part, but I don't have that lamp with me now, so we got to go with this. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you are creating in a pre-established story world, it is your job to do your research. Do you know why it's your job to do your research? Because the one thing that's the most important is brand identity. See, if you have a commercial enterprise, the point of having a business is that after startup costs and operating expenses, you're trying to turn a profit. You're trying to end up with more money than you started with in terms of the money you invested to make the business happen. Startup costs and operating expenses. And then you want to get enough money coming back in to where it exceeds the amount of money you put in. That's what we call turning a profit. And that's also the amount of money you net, not the amount of money you gross. That is business 101, is that after I've spent X amount of dollars making the business, what is my Y amount of dollars? And is that more than my X amount? Okay, because if it is, then I've turned a profit and I'm in the black. If it's not, then I'm operating at a loss, or I've sustained a loss and I'm in the red. Understand? That's business 101. Why is that relevant here? Because when you're dealing with intellectual property that has the potential to bring you over $1 billion in gross revenues in a movie, wouldn't you want to make that movie as good as possible? Wouldn't you want to make that movie the best possible movie it can be? Because if you say no to that, you are literally shooting yourself in the foot. You done went somewhere and bought a gun and bought the billets, talk about kapow, kapow, what's wrong with y'all? And that's what people keep doing. Getting a gun, loading the gun with bullets, shooting himself in the foot, kapow, kapow, and talk about what's wrong with your fans? There's nothing wrong with the fans. It's your job when you're dealing with intellectual property that you didn't invent. Now, it's different if it's something that you invented. But when it's intellectual property that you didn't invent, that means it's a pre-existing story world. It's your job when you step into situations like that to do your research. Why? Because of brand identity. You don't get to go work at Toyota and bring Ford's makes and models and values. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? You don't get to go work at McDonald's, but you bring Pizza Hut's products, content, values, taglines, slogans. You don't get to use Pizza Hut slogans and taglines at McDonald's. That doesn't make any sense. Because you've got brand identity. You've got brand identity. Okay, once again, this is business 101. This is not deep. This is not intense. This is not a marketing degree. This is very, very basic. When you see them golden arches, they represent McDonald's and all that stands for. You would not expect to see the golden arches, and then what shows up in the commercial is like some restaurant you ain't never heard of. Walk in McDonald's one day and say I want like a beef bowl, which is sweet and sour beef, and or I want a Philly cheesesteak, or I want something like that. McDonald's don't sell that. Okay, brand identity. This is not difficult. How is that relevant to Superman? How is that relevant to this stuff? I'll tell you how. Because you have to research and discover and understand what the character meant and what the character has come to mean. This is the part that people don't want to deal with, and that is just being lazy. If you don't want to deal with that, that's being lazy. That's just being lazy. There's no other word for that. There's no other way for me to dress that up or do whatever. That's laziness. You just being lazy. Why? Because you not only need to understand what the character has meant, you need to understand what the character means. Do you know why? Because you're talking about a gross revenue of $1 billion plus. That's why. You're talking about one of, if not, we're talking about Superman, you're talking about one of, if not the biggest icon in the subgenre of superhero movies. Because superhero movies are a subgenre, most people say, of sci-fi and fantasy. Okay, I'm not really arguing that point or not, but the point I'm trying to make is that when you're dealing with something that can give you gross revenues of $1 billion plus, why in the world would you not want to make that movie as good as possible? As good as possible. But instead, you're going to come in and you're going to spit on. I probably spit when I said that. You're going to spit on everything that the character has come to mean. Why did I give you that history at the beginning about the Kents? Because there are some of you smart cockroaches that are going to say, well, they weren't always around. He didn't always mean that. That's true. When you read the when you read the early Siegel and Schuster stories, especially when you read stuff about, World War II stuff and, superheroes as propaganda against the Nazi regime, all that different kind of stuff. And just the way, Batman killed early and just the way they came across, they were much rougher and just different than what you would expect because of the values of the time, because art tends to be a reflection of the time that it's created in. So it is technically, practically, actually true that the Kents aren't even mentioned by name in Superman's first appearance, but they are in the second one, but only his mom, then all that stuff I told you about how that evolves. But that's my point. If you know anything about Superman, you know that like so many intellectual properties, all of his mythology elements didn't happen all at once. Like kryptonite, for example, comes from the radio show because the actor voicing him on the radio show needed a break and may have been going on vacation, and they had to find a way to continue the show without Superman on it. So they came up with kryptonite, saying that he got sick and so he couldn't talk, and somebody else moaned and groaned. And that's actually where kryptonite comes from, if you didn't know that. Truth and justice in the American way evolved. That phrase evolved, and then it kind of became solidified in the George Reeves television serial, because that was not always Superman's tagline. And if you notice, these days, they dropped the American way. That's a whole nother debate. But now if they say anything, they say truth and justice. They don't really say the American way that much anymore. And there's a reason for that. The main reason for that being is because the American way is no longer one thing, or the American way is no longer clear, and or the American way is no longer something that Superman might actually stand for. So if you notice, they've kind of subtly phased that out in certain areas or whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is your job as a content creator, when you're fooling with other people's property, to do your research to understand what the character has meant and what the character has come to mean. So yes, you can make the argument that the Kents weren't around originally and that they were not originally credited with his moral shaping, and they weren't even named originally Jonathan and Martha, because all of that is true. But they came to mean that. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. They came to mean through the introduction of the Superboy comic book series and all that happened during the Silver Age version of Clark in action as a teenager. They have come to mean through that introduction and involvement. They have come to mean that being the ones that shaped and molded him into the character he has become, getting his values from that. And I just said on Twitter, if you want to see a perfect example of that in book form, you want to read the excellent Superman Peace on Earth by Paul Dini and Alex Ross. It's a perfect iteration of how Clark is flashing back through the whole book, thinking about the lessons that Pa Kent Jonathan taught him and how he's now applying them in his role as Superman. That's what the character has come to mean. So in Man of Steel, when you have Martha Kent say stuff like, be their angel, be their hero, be all of it, or be none of it, because you don't owe this world anything and you never did. That's not something that we've heard Martha Kent say before, to my knowledge, and that's not something that we would expect Martha Kent to say, that Clark don't owe anything to the world. Because the very reason Superman does what he does is because he was adopted and loved by people that could have turned him over to the scientists, and people that could have turned him over to be a lab experiment, and people that could have turned him over to the government for a nice, tidy sum of money. Let me ask you a question. What would the government have paid for an alien baby that looks like a white baby from another planet that's got Superman's powers? What would the government pay for that? What kind of check could they have gotten if they had turned Clark over to the government? But they didn't. And by the time Clark became an adult, he understood that. He recognized that. He got that. Okay? So the very reason that Clark's heart and mind is the way it is because he realized his parents, his adoptive parents, could have done a whole nother turn, but they didn't. They did everything they could to adopt him and raise him and teach him how to be a force for good, teach him about how to be a hero, naming him and even making his costume. So when you have Martha Kent saying stuff like that you don't owe this world anything, you don't owe them anything you never did, that sounds rather selfish and small-minded. And then when you have Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel, Lord have mercy, telling Clark that hiding his identity is more important than helping people. And Clark says, what should I have done? Let a bus full of school children die? Jonathan says, I don't know, maybe. That's that gun again, shooting yourself in the foot, talking about what's wrong with the fans? Ain't nothing wrong with the fans. That's not something Jonathan Kent would say to his son. Well, he's taking a different take on it, and it is year one. But if you understand that the Kents have come to be accepted in the mythos as the source of Clark's moral fiber, the reason he's not a tyrant, not saying that he would have been, because Red Son, the book and the animated movie, explores that idea. If Superman had landed somewhere else, who would he have become? Is Superman who he is because Kal-El is a naturally good person? Does he have capitalistic values? Does he have imperialistic values? Fascinating question, but it's been, that's the reason when you do an elsewheres or a what if about him landing somewhere else, is because you're contrasting it to what actually happened as the mythology involved, and the Kents get the credit for making him who he is. And so when Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel says stuff like, maybe you should have let a bus full of kids die, Jonathan would say that, and Superman would never in a million years step back and do nothing. As a matter of fact, in John Byrne's reboot, when you see Superman first fly into action, he flies into action without a costume. And that's one of the things that helps him to realize, if I'm going to keep operating this way, I need to have a costume, a uniform, a symbol, something for people to see that represents something. Because when he first flew into action, he was in street clothes. Okay? So Superman wouldn't step back and do nothing. And his stepfather saying, I don't know, maybe. No. Okay? And then the way Jonathan Kent dies in that movie is stupid beyond stupid. That's right, I said it. It's stupid. It's stupid beyond stupid, because he tells Clark not to save him from a hurricane, literally by doing what I just did. Hold his hand up and said, no, don't save me. Now everybody realizes that Superman moves at super speed, right? And everybody realizes that, you know, on Smallville, they called him the red, blue blur. And everybody realizes that Superman actually, especially in that situation where you already have competing winds and you have debris and you have maybe not a clear picture of what was going on, Clark could have saved Jonathan at super speed and no one would have been the wiser. But Jonathan literally sat up there and committed suicide trying to communicate to Clark that it's more important that you keep your powers hidden, and I'm willing to sacrifice my own life. Do you understand the stupidity of that? Because 24 hours after Jonathan did that, then another crisis could arise and Clark would have to make another choice. So in other words, by Jonathan taking himself out of the mix, it does not actually long-term preserve Clark's secret, because Clark is going to run into other situations where he needs to act. That's what he wants to do, is act on those powers. And moving at super speed, many times he can move and not be seen. There was a trope used in the comics that one of the reasons people didn't know Clark Kent was Superman is because when Superman was in action, he used to blur his face. Now on the TV show, the CW TV series, The Flash, In the first season, before everybody knew who Barry was, Barry used vibration to scramble his voice. So when he spoke, he didn't sound like Barry, because there's a couple times he was actually speaking to Iris kind of in shadow, but he would mask his voice so people would know that was Barry. Well, in the comics, Superman used to vibrate his face at super speed, and so you can never get a clear shot of him. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's more than one way for Superman to operate and help people, even in costume, and mask his face or mask his identity if he needed to. And Jonathan Kent didn't seem to have enough macro vision, enough forward thinking, enough big picture thinking to understand that if I die and I'm not in the mix, that's not going to change the fact that Clark is going to have to make a decision on how he operates. Okay? And doing it that one time does not negate all the times in the future where Clark is going to have to make that decision. That is a regular part of Superman's life. It's kind of a running joke, but the idea that he's with a crowd of people, or he's with his people at the Daily Planet, or he's with Lois, or he's with somebody that don't know he's Superman, danger happens, trouble happens, and Clark has to excuse himself and go run into a phone booth, which is funny now, but the point I'm trying to make is that Jonathan didn't have enough big picture thinking to understand that taking himself out of the mix through suicide was not going to change the situation for Clark at all. It was just stupid. Yeah, I said it, I meant it, and I'm here to represent it as stupid. And that's small-minded for someone raising the Man of Steel. Okay? So the point I'm making in this rant, the point I'm making in all this stuff is trying to tell you that you need to not be lazy when you're writing other people's intellectual property. You need to do your research. You need to understand what the character means and what the character has come to mean, especially the top icon of a genre. If you ask most people who's the most popular superhero, it'll be a tie between Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. They're still the best-selling worldwide, to my knowledge. Last time I checked the stats, Spider-Man is still the most merchandised, but those logos, that Superman shield and that bat logo, are still the most recognized superhero logos in the world. Okay? So when you're dealing with an icon of that status and on that level, and you don't seem to want to take the time to do enough research to understand what the character has come to mean, because you don't, they keep hiring a guy that never read the comic. They say, oh, I love this character, I love that character, but haven't read a comic a day in their life? Oh, I want you to show me another industry where you can do that, where you can go work at a company, and even in the interview, you have the smart person that's vying for a job does some background check on the company so you can learn something about the company you're trying to get to hire you. The last thing in the world you would ever want to do is come into an interview and be quoting statistics that don't apply to the company you're interviewing with. They'll look at you like you grew a second head because that's stupid. That's why. So why in the world would you deal with the most iconic superhero of all time and have no idea about their background, no idea about people's expectations, no idea about what the character's mythology means and how it has evolved? That makes no sense and is lazy. Okay? So that's why I gave you the background about the Kents. That's where all that comes from. That's why people expect it. It was in the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, how Jonathan Kent, before he died, spent his time teaching Clark not to be a show-off, that he had a greater reason for being on Earth than scoring touchdowns. Okay? So it's introduced in the comics around 1939. Excuse me, 10 years later. That's when Superman came out, it was 1938. It is introduced in the comics around 1948, 1949, 10 years after that. Yes, but it's become an accepted part of the mythos now. It's become an accepted part of the mythology now. And that's why people were shocked and gasping and holding their breath when you hear Martha Kent say stuff like, you don't owe this world anything. And you hear Jonathan Kent saying, maybe you should have let a bus full of school children die. And you see Jonathan Kent let himself die when Clark could have saved him easily and no one would have even noticed. And that wouldn't be the last Clark was faced with that choice. It's stupid and it's lazy. And if you don't like that, then oh well, because I said what I said. So I just had to come on here and rant about this thing because it seems like we keep having the same arguments. And I like to come from a point of facts. And what happened in the comics is factual. I'm not making that up. And the lines that were depicted and shot and screened in the movie are factual. They happen. I'm not making that up. And Superman and Man of Steel gets outed because Zod comes to Earth looking for him. He was helping people, yes, but he was helping people on the low. He didn't come forward until he was forced to, which is way too reminiscent of Smallville for me. But anyway, my Superman always becomes a superhero because his parents taught him to, because he wants to, because he wants to help, because he wants to serve humanity, not for any other reason. Okay? So that's the end of this particular Superman rant, but I'm sure I'll be back with some more rants because this is an argument where I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm so tired of this argument. This same argument. I'm tired of it. So that's why I had to come on and rant about it. All right? I'll check y'all later.